Okay, welcome back to another episode of Stuff I Make with Grand Inquisitor Chris. Today we're going to talk about making thatched roofs like I have on this one here. The thatched roof on this is made out of a wash towel that I had in my rag bin, soaked in glue. I'm going to show you how to do that here. I'm going to show you the end result here that I got with the last thatched roof when I tried this out for the first time. Yeah, you can see the nice different layering on it. And it's hard as a rock. So this is going to last quite a while. So let's go ahead and talk about what we need. Let me turn the camera mount. Come on, work with me. Okay, here we go. Okay, so I have this roof that I'm ready to go ahead and put a thatched roof on. First thing you're going to need is a washcloth or towel. The one thing you want to make sure, this one is a clean towel. I actually had it in my rag bin. It's just stained from years and years of use for cleaning up various things. This will not affect it at all because the final product is going to be painted, and since this has been put through the washer just this morning, in fact, this is nice and clean. It's not going to affect anything as far as adhesion. The roof that I just showed you actually had darker discoloration on it than this. But right now at this stage, let me zoom in. Okay, so one thing that's important to note is that when you do this, not everyone is going to have a spare one of these to throw away. So maybe you just want to go to Walmart or something and buy a pack of washcloths or whatever, and that's perfectly fine. But you need to make sure that it is a one uniform texture for it, as far as the way this pattern is. You'll notice that it's got those little loops, it's the entire thing. And I'm bringing this up because you want to make sure that it's not like this towel, where it's got the two different textures on it that will not work when you're doing the final product. You need it to have the one uniform texture because you want to be able to have your entire strip have this on it. Let me widen back out. Okay. Now, you also need to make sure that it is wider than your roof that you're going to put it on. You need to decide on about how tall you want the strips to be. I'm probably going to go with about an inch and a quarter on each strip. But first things first, you need to remove this edge. So I'm just going to cut that off. Does not have to be perfect. And this is, like I said, coming out of my rag bin. So if this comes out to be just a little too small for what I need, I will just go ahead and cut up another rag. But I'm going to go ahead and cut these four sides off. Then once I do that, I'm going to cut it into the strips. When you're cutting your strips, you're going to need to figure out how many strips you're going to need. So I'm probably going to need 3 strips on each side, one here, here, and here. And then there's another strip that goes on the top that has to be bigger to cover both sides. So like I said, these will be about probably an inch and a quarter. This one will be double that because it's actually going to cover both sides. I'm going to go ahead and prep this, cutting it into strips and cutting the edges off, and I'll be right back. And we're back. Now we're to the dry fitting stage. So I've got all my strips. I'm going to go ahead and lay them out. And what I'm doing right now is just making sure that they are big enough and that I have enough of them to cover the entire roof. They don't have to be perfect, but right now we're looking at the spacing. Okay, this will work out pretty good. Okay, so you can see that with this I'm going to have quite a bit of flat space up here. So I've got this little strip here that was left over from when I cut it, and I'm just going to go ahead and when I glue it in, I'm going to glue that little bit to the top. Okay, so the next step is to cut them to length. To do that, I'm going to start out with this tiny little strip, just because it'll be the easiest one to work with. Now, you want it to be just over the edge on the sides, so about that long. But to make it easier to cut, I'm going to go ahead and, especially with as shaky as my hands are, I pulled it a little further over this edge, and then I'm going to cut it flush with this one. Okay, so then when I put it back on, got just a little bit of overhang. Okay, then I'm going to use this to basically measure the length of the others. And like I said, this does not have to be perfect. In fact, the less perfect that you make it, the better. I'm going to use this little rotary cutter that I have. Make sure when you're doing this you keep track of all your pieces, because this is going to be a scrap. I can use this for something else, I'm just not going to use it for this. So make sure that all your scraps get put off to one side, that way you don't end up screwing something up. In fact, these would be perfect for a small shed or shack of some sort. Okay, now this part is done. I'm going to go ahead, clean up my area here, get rid of all these little bits of lint and everything. Get set up for the next step. I am going to warn you, this is going to be a fairly long project, so to speak, in that there's going to be a lot of drying time. If you're doing several of these sheds, you could do several in a day, or if you're doing several of these roofs, you could do several in a day. The biggest issue is just going to be with the drying time. So this is going to be something that you're not going to start this out and get it done 15 or 20 minutes later. Definitely going to need quite a bit of time. Talk to you in a bit. Bye. Okay guys, and we're back. So I've got all my strips here. I've gone ahead and put the roof onto this house just so it holds it a little better for me at a working angle. Got some watered down glue. The house is going to be on a drying rack, so that any drips or anything go into the little thing here. So you can see I've got the glue fairly watered down. It's probably 60% water and 40% glue. I want it to be really, if you look, you can see how the brush pulling through it kind of leaves a little trail there, just for a second. You don't want it too thin and you don't want it too thick. And the reason for that is because this is going to be a multi-step process. This part's going to be probably the longest part of this video. So first thing, I'm going to take one of the small strips, put it in the glue, saturate it, and just squeeze it out. I'm going to put it on the roof, hold it here with my fingers. I'm going to take this disposable toothbrush. You're going to position the strip so that it is hanging just over the edge by a couple of millimeters. And over the edges here. You want to make sure that it's fairly straight, that it's not too bowed here. Because you want to have a nice straight edge on it. We are going to adjust this a few times. So what I'm going to do is I'm I'm going to take this toothbrush, holding with my thumb at the top of the strip. I'm going to brush it down. And this is going to straighten all the fibers. You will have some of the loose fibers come off. That's fine. Sorry guys, my allergies are killing me today. If you have to, you can pull the strip up further on this, for this part of this first step. I'm sure there's probably people out there that would just say glue the strip down first and then do this step, and just brush it down with watered down glue. But I want this to basically be an armored shell for the top of the house, because this is going to get a lot of handling, since it's going to be in the private collection of a game store for their customers to use. I'm going to take with a paintbrush with the glue on it and just go in a downward direction. I'm going to put this second strip on. Going to do the same thing with it. Saturate it with the glue. Place it. Now when you first put it down, the cuts are going to seem kind of severe. I don't know if you can really see that. Yeah, that was good. The cuts are going to seem kind of severe, but as we go through and do the brushing, it's going to soften this edge so that it'll be defined there. But it's going to have a more dragged edge on it because the fibers are going to break up a little. Get the drying rack out from under it. It's just making it a little wobbly. Okay, I'm going to do this with the rest of the strips, and then I'll be back with you guys in just a few minutes. Talk to you in a bit. Okay, so we're back. I've done the 3 strips on the side. I'll show you in just a couple minutes the side profile of this, but we're now at the top. So we're going to take our big double piece, and it's just going to fit right there. Now you need to adjust these as you go. So because of how much that top piece is going to cover, I'm going to adjust the ones below it. Bring them down just a little bit. When you do this, this is still tacky enough that you can pull it off and push it back on. And we'll do some reshaping of the edging here in just a minute. Because as you go through this, it's not a lot of work, but there is quite a bit of care that goes into this. So let's see how that looks. Yeah, I like that much better. Okay. And because we didn't glue all the strips down, we can go ahead and adjust things as we need to as we go. Okay, so this one's now inundated with glue. Actually, not quite. Make sure that this that each of these strips is fully soaked in the glue, because as we go through this over the next few steps of this, as it dries, that glue is going to harden up all of the cloth. And we want that because this is going to be a nice armored shell pretty much for the top. So you want to make sure that you get it fully saturated with glue. And we're just going to go ahead and continue on as I have. I'm not pushing too hard with a paintbrush. I'm just kind of dragging it and letting it loosen up all of those fibers. Now, as you're doing this, it's probably not going to look the greatest at this step. But the finished product definitely is pretty nice. When you're doing this top one, because it's a longer piece, the fibers are going to kind of go in one direction, so it may fight you a little bit on the other side. But that's fine, because it's just going to add to the finished product's appearance. Also, when I'm doing this, I'm not holding the toothbrush flat against the top. I'm holding it at an angle as I'm pulling down. So I'm really using more one edge than the whole thing. Now, go ahead and grab this tiny little piece we have for the very, very top. gonna go ahead and press this here. It's also very important when you're doing this, go straight this way as much as you can, not at an angle. You can touch it up if you want and have a few little angled shots there, but mostly you want to go straight up and down to get those fibers to line up right. Okay, now I'm going to put this back on the drying rack, or on the dripping rack I should say, since that's what it is for this project. I'm not applying too much pressure. Sorry. I'm not applying too much pressure as I do this. But this is going to help blend all of the fibers together. As far as the final appearance, now in this stage, I'm going to apply a little more pressure in some areas when I'm doing this, because I don't want the thatch to look too stiff. I want it to look like it's natural, and natural thatch kind of deteriorates. So I wanted to have a little more variation in the final product. Apply a little more on this side now. Because basically at this stage you're just doing some artistic variation. You want to make sure that your glue is plenty watered down for this. Okay. Let me wash my hands up. Okay. Now this is going to be probably the most annoying part of the rest of this project. I'll go ahead and put the camera off the mount. Okay, camera doesn't want to come off the mount, so we'll just take the camera with it. Okay, I'm gonna, because of my editing program, I'm gonna go ahead and stop this for just a second. Okay, and we're back. Sorry, I don't have the editing program to make all this look so perfect. So in order to make this fit right once I get the video fully done, basically I'm showing you this step so you can see that you can see the layers. You can see the variations. Got a little bit more pulling down here, here, here. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and let this dry for about 45 minutes to an hour. When we get back to it, I'll show you the next step. Okay, and we're back. So it's been about an hour, and if you touch it, it's still not dry, and that's fine. We don't want it to be. Okay, because we're going to do some sculpting on it as it's drying. Okay, so I've got some watered down glue. I'm using carpenter's glue on this just because it's what I had handy. Okay. Let's see if I have a better brush. Oh, this one will do. Okay, now that we're at this stage, I'm going to go ahead and use a more flat brush. This is just another one of those disposable brushes I got from one of those $5 bags from the hobby craft store thing. Okay, and the reason I want a big brush like this is because I want it to soak up a lot of glue. Now, as this soaks up more and more glue on the house, this is basically going to saturate all of the little holes in the fibers and turn this into a shell. And that's why I have the drying rack here, because eventually the watered down glue will run to the bottom of this. This will also adhere all of the layers together. Now this part of the project is pretty much a all-day thing for me. I'm going to do this over the course of several hours. If you're doing several of these houses, you could crank out these thatched roofs, because the majority of the work is really just applying the thatched roof. This part is, like I said, it's been about an hour since I did the original thatching. So this part's just going to be a couple of minutes. And as you're going with this brush, it's going to help to pull the fibers on the cloth down even more. Make sure you get these edges too. While you're doing this, the edges are actually hanging over quite a bit, so they're wrapping around the edges. Don't worry about that. We want a little bit of that. Basically, once you apply the layer of glue that you're going to apply, just use the brush to pull them out a little bit. They don't have to be flat out, because we're basically going to trim this up once the shell is finished. Okay. Now, before I sit down, I'm going to go ahead and add some more glue to this, because I don't want to go through a ton of these brushes over the course of the day. So just adding some more water and glue at this stage. Actually, I've got some glue in there. I'm not going to add any more glue at the moment. I'll wait to add more actual glue until the next time that I come over here. Now, if you need to at this stage, if you want to do a little more sculpting, it is pretty well adhered to the roof, but you don't want to pull too tightly or too hard down on it. If you want to do any more sculpting with your toothbrush, you can. And as you can see, I've got some drainage here. So this is why we're doing this on a drying rack. Got a thread here I want to get rid of. See if I can do the other right there. Actually, a little bit more here. Bottom row, you want to do the same thing. Just pull it out a little bit with the brush. Stick the brush under the bottom. Don't pull it out too far from the house. Basically, you're just pulling it up a little bit to get it flat with the edge of the roof. Doesn't hurt if it's a little bit down, because that's going to be what natural fibers will do. You just want to make sure that it's not actually curled up under the roof. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and set these off to the side. I'm going to let this dry again probably for another hour, maybe 2. Come back and check on it. You want to make sure that it never fully dries in between any of these coats, at least not for the first several. We're probably going to do this about 4 or 5 times more and get a nice saturation on it. Each time we do this, it's going to fill up more and more of the little pockets of the fiber, and make it into a more and more of a solid roof. Which definitely, it may sound like overkill, but a lot of the projects that I do because I do them the way I do them, because I don't want to have to continually repeatedly make something. So if I make a building like this, it's going to last a few years, if not several. The buildings or the little cottages that I took into the game store from a blog post I did several years ago, those are still at the game store, and so far the only damage is that one of them had a little bit of damage on the roof on one of the tiles. And those have been getting played with quite regularly for probably 4 or 5 years now. So doing this means it's going to last longer, and that it's going to not have to be fixed and not have to be replaced like some of the more cheaply made terrain that people use. Which means that when you're not repairing stuff and you're not having to go through and replace stuff, you're able to spend that time building new stuff or working on scenarios. That's part of the reason I make things as sturdy as I do, is because that way I can spend time working on other projects. Sorry about the rant. I'll go ahead and turn this off and we'll be back in a bit. Okay, and we're back. Let it go for a couple of hours. Gonna go ahead and apply another coat. It's still incredibly soft because it's still wet from the last coat. We're really soaking this down, and because the glue's got so much water in it, and the surface is going to dry out before the deeper down part will, before the undercoats, whatever. Making sure that these additional coats are pretty watery. That way it soaks in and reaches all of the deep down material. I'll finish this up and get back with you guys in a bit. Okay, so we're back. I put on 6 coats of glue by now, and I let it dry. Now, depending on the conditions of where you're at as far as the humidity and the type of cloth that you're using, that can affect the dry time as well as the thickness that you're going to want to go with. So when you start out, you're going to want to start out fairly wet and watery on the glue coats. The first couple of coats are going to kind of solidify themselves to each other. So the last coats, or as you do each coat, make the next coat a little bit drier, or a little bit thicker, I should say. As far as this goes, you can see from above the lines of definition to show you where the different layers are. So at this stage, we've got a lot of this overhang. I'm just going to go ahead and take some of these pewter snips, and we're just going to clean that up. So I've got a line here. Let me zoom in a bit. Okay, you can see that I've got this line here. This will be a good point, so we're going to try and make that line go across. Remember, this is a solid piece now. The glue is dried nice and hard. I'm going to go ahead and clean this up, and I'll get back to you in just a second. Okay, and we're back. zoom back out. Okay, so I've cleaned up the edges here. You don't want them to be perfectly straight. I'm not going to bother cleaning up this edge here or here. You can do that if you want to, but I kind of like the uneven look of it, and it gives us those nice fibers that are going to look really good in the painting process. The next step is going to be painting, but because this is part of a house project that I'm doing and I still have to stucco the house, I'm going to go ahead and get this stuccoed, which will be another video on itself, and then I'll get to the painting. Talk to you guys later. Okay, so here we are with the finished roof. You can see the nice striations for the different layers that we did. Same thing with the other side. One of the things that you want to do is you don't want everything to be exactly symmetrical, because you want this to look like something that someone would actually have on their houses that wasn't rich enough to get an actual shingle or slate roof house. So doing something like this where it's a little overstretched really makes for a nice final finished piece. Here you can see the whole thing. I laid it over the eaves enough so that at tabletop height you're not going to be able to see anything from under here. And there we go.